Every certificate is a trade-off between three big dimensions: how strong the security needs to be, what identity you're trying to verify, and how that certificate will actually be used. Security needs cover encryption strength, integrity, and any compliance or regulatory requirements. Identity verification is about how much assurance you need that a person, device, or organization is who they claim to be. Usage is where constraints come in. Which operations are allowed, in which environments, and for how long. Different certificate types emphasize these dimensions differently. Server and client certificates focus on secure connections. Code signing protects software integrity. MIME protects email. Device certificates anchor IoT. And CA certificates sit at the top of the trust chain. There is no universal best certificate. Good PKI design is about choosing the right type and constraints, so the level of trust matches the specific risk and use case. Domain-validated TLS is the speed layer of web encryption. In this model, the certificate authority checks just one thing. Do you control this domain right now? It does that using simple DNS or HTTP challenges that your web server answers automatically. Because the check is narrow, issuance is very fast and often free, especially when automated with Acme tools like Let's Encrypt. Certificates are short-lived, so you typically renew them every few months through scripts or your DevOps pipeline. This works well for encrypting traffic to personal sites, internal microservices, and dev or staging environments, where you mainly need confidentiality and integrity. What DV does not do is prove who is behind the site. There's no real-world identity or organizational vetting, which is why it's not enough on its own for high-risk use cases like financial transactions or regulated healthcare portals. Organization-validated, or OV, certificates are the business standard for showing that a real company is behind a website. They start with the same basic domain control check you'd see with DV. Can this applicant actually control this domain? Then they go further. The certificate authority also confirms that the organization is legally registered, active, and associated with that domain, using official business records and contact details. The result is a moderate but meaningful level of assurance. Users don't just get encryption, they get evidence that the site belongs to a legitimate business entity. That's why OV is commonly used for corporate sites, B2B platforms, and services where customers expect to be dealing with a verified organization, not just anyone who can spin up a domain. Extended Validation, or EVTLS, is the high assurance tier for website identity. Compared to DV or OV, the CA doesn't just check that you control a domain and have a registered business. They also verify your legal organization in depth, confirm it physically exists, and tie it to government documents and background checks. The goal isn't stronger encryption. The cryptography is the same. The goal is stronger identity proof, so high-value users can be more confident they're really talking to a specific bank, government agency, or critical service, not a convincing lookalike. The trade-offs are cost and friction. EV involves manual paperwork, can't be fully automated, and renewals are slower and more expensive. That makes sense for regulated institutions and crown jewel systems, but it's usually overkill for startups or fast-changing cloud architectures where automation matters more than this level of identity assurance. Wildcard certificates are a popular way to make TLS easier to manage at scale. Instead of getting a separate certificate for every subdomain, you get a single certificate for star.domain.com and reuse it across many hosts like shop, mail, or dev. That's efficient, cheaper, and often much simpler to automate. But the convenience comes with a serious trade-off. All those subdomains now depend on one private key. If that key is ever leaked, stolen, or mishandled, every service that relies on the wildcard instantly becomes vulnerable. You've created a single point of failure for an entire environment. Because of that, Wildcard keys demand much stricter protection, monitoring, and access control. In higher risk or highly regulated systems, you'll often limit or avoid wildcards altogether, and instead issue more granular certificates scoped to specific services or environments. Up to now, we've mostly talked about servers proving who they are to users. Mutual TLS simply makes that trust go both ways. In mutual TLS or MTLS, the server still shows its certificate first and the client verifies it. Then the client also presents its own certificate, and the server verifies that using PKI. If both checks succeed, you know you're talking to the right server, and the server knows exactly which user or device it's dealing with. This lets you use certificates instead of passwords or shared secrets for client authentication. It's especially powerful for VPN access, OPS, service-to-service calls, and device identity in enterprises or IoT. The catch is key protection. The client's private key has to be kept in encrypted, well-protected storage, often a secure element or platform key store. At scale, you don't enroll these certificates by hand. You use automated protocols like SCEP or EST, so devices can securely request and renew their own certs. MTLS is one of the most concrete ways PKI enables zero trust, because every connection is strongly authenticated in both directions, every time. Code signing is like digital shrink wrap for software. When a developer signs an installer or binary with a code signing certificate, they're attaching their verified identity and a digital signature to that file. Your operating system then checks that signature against trusted certificate authorities. If it matches, you see a trusted publisher instead of an unknown publisher warning. The signature also locks in the integrity of the code. If anyone modifies the executable after it's signed, whether by mistake or with malware, the signature check fails, and the OS can block or warn. Two practices make this reliable at scale. First, use trusted timestamping, so signatures remain valid even after the certificate itself expires. This proves the software was signed at a legitimate point in time. Second, protect the signing private keys like crown jewels. Store them in hardware security modules or smart cards. Never on a developer's laptop or in source control. MIME email certificates do two important jobs at once. They encrypt the message, and they prove who actually sent it. When you encrypt an email with MIME, you're using the recipient's public key. Only their private key can decrypt it. So even if the message is intercepted in transit or stored on a mail server, it's unreadable to anyone else. That's your privacy guarantee. The digital signature works in the opposite direction. You sign the email with your private key, and recipients verify it with your public key. If the signature checks out, they know the content wasn't altered, and that it really came from you, not a fisher pretending to be you. In many regulated or high-risk environments, this becomes a baseline control. Every sensitive or high-value email is both encrypted and signed, reducing spoofing, stopping simple phishing attempts, and helping you meet compliance requirements. So far, we've focused on identities that belong to people or services. Now consider everything else that needs an identity. Sensors, containers, mobile apps, servers in a cluster, even tiny IoT devices at the edge. PKI gives each of these a non-human identity, so they can mutually authenticate and encrypt traffic without human involvement. In modern environments, these device certificates are usually short-lived. Instead of years, we're talking days or weeks. That dramatically reduces the blast radius if a key is stolen, and it forces healthy patterns like frequent rotation and automated renewal. The real challenge is scale. You're not managing a dozen certificates, you're managing thousands or millions. That's why successful IoT and device PKI is built around a central automation hub that can enroll devices, issue and renew their certs, and revoke them when they're compromised or retired, all with zero touch. Finally, the private keys for these identities must live in hardened storage, like a TPM, secure enclave, or similar hardware-backed store. Without that, all the careful PKI design collapses the moment an attacker extracts keys from a cheap device. Self-signed certificates are like writing your own reference letter and then approving it yourself. They prove encryption is happening, but they do not prove who is on the other end. That's why browsers and operating systems will always complain. There is no external authority vouching for that identity. So where are they useful? They're handy in isolated environments where you control both sides. Local development, quick test setups, lab or sandbox systems where you're just validating functionality or API behavior. There, the goal is convenience and encryption, not user trust. But once you have real users, real money, or real data, self-signed certs become a liability. Users can't distinguish your legit self-signed certs from an attacker's, which makes phishing and man-in-the-middle attacks much easier. They also break automation, monitoring, and compliance checks that rely on proper certificate chains. The rule of thumb is simple. Self-signed for experiments and controlled labs. Publicly trusted or enterprise-issued certificates for anything in production. Today, that's easy to achieve with free automated CAs like Let's Encrypt, or with your managed enterprise PKI. Modern PKI works a lot like a military chain of command. At the very top is the root certificate authority. This is the ultimate trust anchor. If you trust the root's key, you can trust everything it delegates. Because it's so critical, its private key is kept offline, usually inside an HSM, and it changes very rarely. Think of it as the do not touch unless absolutely necessary key. The root doesn't normally issue certificates directly to your websites or devices. Instead, it signs one or more intermediate certificate authorities. These intermediates operate online, have shorter lifetimes, and are the ones that actually issue the leaf, or end entity certificates that servers, users, and devices present. This extra layer creates a safety buffer. If an intermediate is ever compromised or behaves badly, you can revoke just that intermediate and stop trusting the certificates it issued, without destroying trust in the root itself. That's how PKI balances strong, long-term trust with the ability to respond to real-world failures and attacks. Choosing the right certificate type starts with understanding the risk and the user's expectations. For public websites, where you mainly need encryption and a padlock in the browser, domain-validated or DV certificates are usually enough and can be fully automated at low cost. For business portals, partner access, or anything that represents your organization's identity, organization validated or OV adds a verified company name. It costs more and automation is a bit harder, but it signals stronger accountability. For banks, governments, or very high-trust use cases, extended validation, or EV, goes even further with extensive audits. These are expensive and typically renewed through manual processes, but they provide the strongest identity assurance. Wildcard certificates are attractive for covering many subdomains, but they concentrate risk in a single private key, so governance and monitoring must be tighter. Code signing certificates sit in a different category. They prove software integrity and publisher identity, so they're high-value targets, and should never be fully automated without strong controls. Finally, device certificates for IoT and internal systems often need full end-to-end automation, because you may be issuing them at massive scale. Here, the priority is secure, highly automated lifecycle management, not user-visible branding. By this point, you've seen a lot of certificate types. Now the key skill is matching the right option to the right problem. Think in terms of constraint and need. If all you care about is basic encryption on a low-budget public site, domain-validated TLS is usually enough. You're proving control of the domain, not the legal identity behind it, but you get strong HTTPS without paying for heavy validation. At the other extreme, if you run a high-risk, high-value financial platform, the need shifts to maximum assurance of who's on the other end. That's where extended validation style approaches make sense. Stricter vetting, stronger legal backing, and clearer accountability if something goes wrong. For massive IoT fleets, the core constraint is scale and the lack of humans in the loop. You solve that with individual device certificates and automated zero-touch issuance and renewal, tightly integrated into your protocols and manufacturing process. And for internal employee VPNs or sensitive internal apps, the problem is not just encrypting traffic, but proving the user or device identity. Mutual TLS with client certificates gives you that. Both sides authenticate, which fits naturally into a zero-trust model. The pattern to remember is simple. Clarify the risk, the scale, and the trust requirement. Then choose the certificate model and automation level that best align with those realities. As PKI evolves, two things happen at the same time. Smarter trends, and very old mistakes that still take systems down. On the positive side, the industry is moving to short-lived certificates, often around 90 days. Short lifetimes shrink the window of damage if a key is compromised, and they force you to design for automation instead of manual renewals. That's where Acme comes in. Acme is the standard protocol that lets services automatically request, prove control, and renew certificates with minimal human involvement. In modern cloud and DevOps environments, Acme-style automation is quickly becoming mandatory. PKI is also being woven into Zero Trust. Instead of a one-time login, identities are continuously re-verified using certificates, device posture, and context. Certificates become a living signal of trust, not just a static badge. Now the pitfalls. Expiry outages are still the #1 PKI failure. Someone forgets to renew, and a critical service just stops. The fix is simple in theory: full automation, monitoring, and clear ownership. Another mistake is using self-signed or dev certificates in production systems. That bypasses the whole trust model and can break clients' compliance and security controls. And finally, key leakage. Private keys end up in source code, config files, or chat logs. Once a private key escapes, you must assume the corresponding identity is broken and move fast to revoke and reissue. The pattern to remember is this: embrace automation and short-lived, well-governed certificates, and be absolutely disciplined about renewals, trusted issuers, and private key handling. Let's quickly lock in the big ideas from certificate types before we move on. For servers, the key decision is how much identity validation you need. Domain validation is fast and cheap, and mainly proves control of a domain. Organization validation adds verified business identity. Extended validation gives you the strongest, most rigorously checked identity. You choose among them based on the risk and impact of that application, not by habit or price alone. Beyond servers, certificates are powerful identity tools. Client certificates let you strongly authenticate users or devices. Code signing certificates prove software integrity and publisher identity. MIME certificates protect email confidentiality and authenticity. Think of these as different flavors of digital ID, each tailored to a specific trust problem. Underneath all of this is the PKI hierarchy. Root CAs act as long-lived trust anchors that are rarely used directly. Intermediate CAs issue the actual end entity certificates and carry most of the operational risk. Designing that hierarchy correctly is what keeps compromise or mistakes contained. Operationally, success comes from discipline. Automate renewals so certificates don't expire and take services down. Protect private keys with the same rigor you'd apply to any crown jewel secret. And always match the certificate type and assurance level to the real-world use case and threat model. With that foundation in place, we're ready to dive into how to actually read and validate certificates in practice.